Hello, and welcome to our Midweek podcast. This is Jerry Hendricks with First Baptist Church, and I'm here with my co-host, Tique Hamilton. Hello, Tique.
Hello, Jerry.
And you may have noticed we have a guest today with us.
Nope, didn't notice that.
Glen Harrison, yeah.
Man in the middle.
Yeah, he's the man in the middle, all dressed up.
And somewhere to go.
Yeah, that's okay. He's had a busy day. Maybe busier than us. I don't know.
Yeah, you told me to wear my work clothes, so I did. Yeah.
There you go. Well, we're glad that you're here today. Thanks for filling in on Sunday. It meant a lot, and
honored to do so.
And I have listened to the podcast already, and appreciate you sharing with our church. And I thought you did a great job, explaining a really good passage.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it is a great passage, and I just was trying to focus on this Lenten season, maybe for people that don't embrace all the traditions of Lent, of focusing in this passage of honoring Christ.
Yeah, it's a good passage. But before we get to that, I was at the Final Four, got back last night, and have a special honorarium for you. Maybe you can. We should have done this earlier, so you could have had this.
I could be wearing this.
It's Tech was there, and
awesome.
Thank
you very much.
Your alma mater, and so, anyways, appreciate you filling in.
Wow.
And wanted to at least get you a T-shirt.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate
and
that.
maybe a lunch later.
Could have brought a victory, but a T-shirt will work.
There's a lot of people trying to get that win, but
that was a tough one.
It didn't happen.
I'm glad you had a good time.
It was
How
good.
many years in a row have y'all done this now?
This was my 10th time to go to a Final Four, and James and I have been on 8 together. And so it was a fun trip. His first time in Minnesota, my third time in Minnesota. And we took in a couple of NBA games in Philadelphia and in Minnesota. We got in a lot of basketball this time. So.
Oh, basketball is what we're talking about. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Yeah, it's that sport where people score.
I don't know, with Tech playing in Virginia,
or even a low score, scoring.
It is now officially baseball season.
Yes, it was that a long time ago for me. So, now we're getting in Sunday.
Let's talk about Sunday.
All right, so Sunday, Glenn, you focused on the passage of Jesus being anointed and talking about being anointed for his death, even though she didn't know the time that she was doing that. But you focused in on how do we honor Jesus with our lives now, because at that time they were doing a meal in honor of Jesus, and I thought it was cool that you brought that out, because we don't think along those. We think of worshiping God, we think of worshiping Jesus, we think of praying, but we don't think about that idea of honoring Jesus that often.
And that's what jumped out at me in John 12, 1 through 8. It initially states, and Lazarus is a big story, obviously, with his resurrection, but they were at the home of Simon, Matthew tells us, Simon the leper, and Lazarus, who was resurrected, and they're having a meal to honor the most significant person in their life for very physical reasons, obviously, but how much more so we would like to, for our salvation, to do something tangible like that to honor Christ.
And they didn't know what was coming. Jesus still knew the cross was right down the road for him, but that had to have been a different dynamic for him. And then she comes in and spills expensive perfume. We talked about it today, that year's wages, $30,000, whatever that costs, and she puts that on his feet, and he says, that's anointing me for my burial.
And you say they didn't get it, and I don't think they did, but I'm not sure that Mary didn't have a clue, because he says she's done this for my burial, and indicating, at least possibly, that she'd been hearing some of the things he'd said to everybody. And like I tried to emphasize, a lot of times I feel like women get it. And spiritual Christian women a lot of times are way ahead of men in service. And she's obviously doing a lavish worship by anointing him. But Martha's serving, they're honoring Christ, and that jumped out at me.
It's interesting that, right around this time is going to happen, Jesus washing the disciples' feet also. She washes his feet, and now he'll wash theirs, and just that idea of serving Jesus, following that model of servanthood. Yeah,
the servanthood, and is big, obviously, or anytime you have foot washing, and how humbling that is. If you've ever had that done to you or for you, it is a very moving experience. Obviously, more of a traditional thing for them to do.
Right.
But Christ accepted the worship, whereas we would be very uncomfortable somebody doing that for us. But Him being God, and The one other significant thing, and I don't know that I got across in the sermon, was that with the tension going on and the storm clouds, that where Christ was, there was peace. At that dinner, he was having a peaceful dinner at that point, while all his the forces of evil, the Pharisees and the council, were all plotting against him, and it was beginning to ratchet up, and yet he's in a good place.
Dun dun.
Dun dun. There you
Just
go.
want to make sure I got that in
You'll
there.
throw it in at some point.
You may need to go back and listen to the message on Sunday.
To understand
Yeah,
what
I had to
that
do
was.
a little Law and Order theme there with that sound effect.
Jerry, you listen to podcasts. I don't want to keep you from getting talked.
I think, in studying, getting ready for Sunday, and then also for Resurrection Sunday, I think we have a natural progression through Holy Week. And so at that point in our journey that we're experiencing through this Lenten season, you tend to slow down, and you can kind of take each thing day by day. But from the period from last Sunday that you spoke of until this coming Sunday, you're still kind of looking at some rapid development. And I think what you mentioned, the fact that there does seem to be a peace that's there amidst a lot of the turmoil, I think that's significant. I still, I think in my own experience, I lean into the relationship a lot. And so having that meal in honor of Jesus at that time was a high relational moment for those people that were in that room. And you do wonder about, and I think that's where I am now, and because the text on Sunday from the lectionary is a long text. It encompasses a lot, right up till the crucifixion. Mm-hmm. And so you start with the Last Supper, and he goes to the crucifixion. So you're trying to think what that experience might have been like for them, and you realize that there had to have been some nuances that they were beginning to pick up on. And you mentioned how Martha and Mary quite possibly were already becoming more attuned, more discerning about what was going on.
The idea that you'd kind of emphasize that it's relationship over rules, and you see here people in relationship with Christ. And as I tried to emphasize, there's ways to honor Christ through witness, through service, through worship. Make sure that begins with the relationship, and kind of along with our theme of what giving up and taking up. Give up trying, the rules, and take up trusting. The relationship was hopefully what would come together out of that sermon.
Well, even going beyond the rules, doing something extravagant that didn't even make sense. I mean, you even mentioned that Judas is the one who spoke up as treasurer, but there were probably others in the room who had the same thought.
Matthew and I believe Mark talk about the other disciples and other people in the room joined in, because it was in one sense you can see the point that they were making. And if you were dealing with any other person other than God himself, God incarnate, then it may have been over the top. But can you lavish too much praise and worship on Jesus? No.
Yeah, and it does bring in question, I think, for us as worshipers, how we enter into worship for ourselves. And you touched on some of that through service and things like that.
That and then the idea that I think I tried to talk about a little bit, wherever there is this lavish worship, we've been in church long enough to know there's always somebody out there that's ready to throw cold water on it.
Yeah,
I like the
be
words
prepared
you
for
use.
it.
You use the words. Whenever we do that, we're going to get pushback from religious hypocrites. Let's just keep that theme going.
You said that.
He said that. It was awesome.
Well,
and then he turned and looked at me, and I was like, "Wait, what?" So,
well, if the beard fits.
Podcast people will have no idea what you're talking about.
That's true. Yeah.
Back up to the idea of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. I get Martha. Like, I totally understand the idea of doing the serving, the behind the scenes stuff. Like, that's what fits with me. And the Mary thing, I probably would have been in line with a lot of disciples and said, "This is extreme. What are you doing?" Because I'm more of that Martha side of my life. That's
more practical.
Yeah, and so I, like you're talking about, I get they're kind of flinching at that in a sense, but a little bit of correction there when Jesus starts talking.
Yeah, the idea of all the good that you could do, but the idea that for a short period of time you've got Jesus here with you, and it's okay to go over the top. It's okay, Martha, that she's here worshiping, that he had talked to her about earlier, because she, in some sense, is recognizing the presence of God and worshiping, and let people worship the way they worship. It may be different than the way you would, but let people have that freedom to worship in a different way, whether it's service or a witness or pouring perfume on their feet.
Did you think any about how, because we don't have Jesus physically here and we don't have a lot of perfume, like what are the ways that Christians can begin to think about honoring Christ in our lives regularly? I mean, we talked about service, we talked about through worship. Like, are there specific themes that you can point to in your life that you can think about that would fit into those categories, or even with Lazarus, the silent witness?
Well, it has to start with, obviously, our relationship with God, but relationship with others. I mean, we can give them theology all day long, but if we're not loving them, we're not honoring him. And so and we should give good theology, and it's important. But if you don't have the love behind it, then you're just become that obnoxious person who's arguing a point of theology. So we honor Christ in the way we love one another, other believers and non-believers alike. We need to be a witness into our community and a blessing to Sweetwater, Texas, because we're here, whether they're believers or not. We can honor God by how we serve our community.
So that love first comes back in. It seems like we talk about that a lot.
It's biblical.
It does tend to happen, yeah. I love the direction that First Baptist Sweetwater is going, and y'all's leadership, emphasizing that, keep bringing it back to the people, bringing it back to me, because I need that, because I can fall into checking those boxes off and pushing relationships aside. So it's good for me to be reminded of it.
Yeah, I think one of the things in worship is thinking about that text and that scene, and then hearing you describe it Sunday and our own worship in this world, right? I mean, that we're going to worship Sunday and the way we worship each Sunday. I think sometimes we forget that it's important for all of us to find our own expression in worship. If you said you can identify with Martha, you've identified how you worship. And one of the difficulties is in a worship setting or structure and planning an order, planning a service together, it is hard to create some of those, but it's not created in a way that a person should be inhibited from the way they express that best. Right. I know I go over this with friends all the time. In our last church, where we met in a coffee shop, it was not unusual for people to come in and start journaling, which was their worship expression, before we had ever started. And that's I think where I began to learn because I can tend to lean into process, but while we shouldn't expect everything to come from the stage and the microphone to direct us. Right. Because sometimes we may need to go off the chart with our own expression and do something that for our own worship is a little outside of what the context maybe that we feel like that we're in sometimes.
I agree, and while there's 3 different modes of worship, we shouldn't just be content that's the only way I worship. We should try to get out of our comfort zone a little bit and understand and worship in spirit and in truth. Truth, obviously, embracing theological accuracy, but truth and being honest about it, and not be that religious hypocrite, that you're not doing it for show, but you're there for God and God alone as you worship. And it's not about us, what we get out of it, but what we put into our worship.
Right, and there's an expectancy, I think, that we tend to, those of us who come to church every Sunday, you tend to lose that edge of expectancy sometimes. Absolutely. And so when you have a scene that's like this, that is extravagant, I think it sort of jars us and helps us to remember that she seized a moment and she took the opportunity to do something that she'd never be able to do again.
Right.
And she did it in a way that got the attention of others, but it was more than anything else, it was something that she was able to do as her own expression.
And I think from the stage side of worship, like you were talking about, when we find those ways to give people the opportunity to worship in their own way. So last week, or 2 Sundays ago, when you put a picture up of the prodigal son, the painting, like that resonated with people who are visual, who that's how they respond in worship. And it created a lot of conversation and a lot of reflection, which is worship.
Right.
And I think it's easy to fall into our routines, and there's not much difference between a rut and a groove, and trying to be in a groove and meeting people in different ways, visually, musically, the sermon, the things that we do that will, as we learn in different fashions, that's important, and that seemed to be what was happening in this dinner even.
I loved at the end of the service when you tied it into the idea of the offering when we're going to be passing the plates, and you said, no matter whether you have a check or cash to give or nothing, accept the plate and see it as a way of offering yourself to Christ in that moment. And I think too often that becomes your rut of passing the plates. And so we don't think of that as a time where we are still offering ourselves, even if we don't have a check to put in the plate that week.
Yeah, like I said, very often I'll just kind of wave it off if I don't have an offering that week. And thinking back to Mary, that she gave something lavish, expensive, the most precious thing that she could give. We don't have something that we can do like that ourselves. It's symbolically a giving of yourself. And it's, like I said, it's not magical, but touching the plate as a reminder, if you're tactile, then maybe that helped you.
And we have this happen every once in a while, but Richard Ferguson had Meredith with him, and so she helped pass the plate. And so it's cool to see that also, to see the way that he's training her to serve and to worship or be a part of worship. So that was tied in there also, along with what you said. And it was a neat experience to end worship with.
And I think we're doing a good job. Y'all are doing a good job of, whatever you do it as unto the Lord. Passing the plate is an act of worship. We're serving His bride, the body of Christ, and when we serve the church.
That's all I got. I'm out.
Well, it sounded like it was a good day. I always hate
It was a good day.
Missing.
It's a good day today.
I always hate missing and not being here, but do enjoy being able to connect through the different social media that we have. And I know a lot of people are beginning to use that, to utilize that, to continue this conversation. And like I've said repeatedly, this is a period of time where that conversation is more cohesive than any other time of the year. If you look at the Bible readings that we provide and things like that it's just a very deeply meaningful time if you allow yourself to walk in that path. And I think you mentioned it Sunday. It's it is a journey that you want to take in as you go, and not just rush toward that Resurrection Sunday like we can be guilty of sometimes. But
speaking of Resurrection Sunday, this week starts Holy Week.
This Sunday begins Holy Week, and we have a lot of activities going on. I encourage you to check those things out on our website and social media. It's going to be right now still trying to narrow down the passage, this particular part of the story that we'll use, because it does cover such a wide part before we celebrate. And so I would encourage you too, if you're available, to join us on Friday for our Tenebrae service, which is also called a Service of Shadows. Very meaningful service, but it kind of helps create that rhythm that we have during this last days of the life of Jesus before we celebrate on Sunday.
I'll be there.
I'll be there. Look forward to seeing everyone there, and y'all have a great week.
See ya.